Hello and welcome back to the Grid Podcast, your podcast about our electricity networks in Great Britain and their role at the heart of our transition to net zero, with a particular focus on getting everything connected to the electricity networks in the whole transition to electrification. So it's myself, Brian Muirhead, back hosting again today, and we are talking about connection reform again, pretty much the only topic anybody involved in the industry is talking about at the minute. And I'm joined by special guest today, Damian.
Hello.
Damian has spent a lot of time sitting behind the camera on the podcast, doing a lot of the analysis, scripting and research. So we have the brains behind the what has been going on recently in front of camera today, which is good. So this is going to be the start of a burst of podcasts, is probably the best way to describe them now. Covering connection reform. So for anybody that is aware, it is consultation season. So there's probably 6 or 7 consultations out at the minute, and there's more expected, basically as the whole rule book around how you get connected to the grid in GB is rewritten. So first up in this episode, we're going to cover at a very high level everything that's going on. So we've put a summary table on our LinkedIn. We'll put a link to that in the comments or the notes section of this video, and that'll help kind of give you an overview. So that'll basically list out all the key consultations, who the consultant party is, a brief description of what they are, the date the consultation opens, and the date, importantly, the deadline by which the consultation closes. So we're going to kick off this podcast just by running through that at a high level, just trying to explain what is everything that's going on, how does it interlink. And then after that, again, the aim of this first episode, we're going to try and really keep this into bite-sized chunks. So we're going to aim to try and do this in 15 minutes, and then we'll break for a cup of tea and come back with more detail on the next episode. But basically, we'll take you through everything that's going on consultation-wise, how it links, and then we'll hopefully have time in this episode then to do a very high-level summary on one of the key consultations, which is the Cost Code Mod CMP 434, which I'll explain in a minute. But that's effectively the overarching or the high-level code modification consultation that basically sets the structure for how connection reform will work. It was CMP 434 that was consulted on earlier in the summer. We did a couple of episodes on that in a bit of detail. I think you might have had people had about 8 working days or something to respond to that back in summer. So we're going to touch on that high level because we've done a lot of detail on that before. We'll touch on it high level here in this episode, mainly focusing on key aspects that have changed. And then following that, we'll do a series of again, bite-sized episodes looking into more of the new detail and actually the stuff that's probably more interesting for everybody. So that's a bit of an intro to this episode. We'll basically get into it now. And if all goes to plan, we'll condense all of this into 15 minutes, and it'll be really bite-sized, easy to bite off, and give you a great summary. If it goes to plan. If not, we might need to split this into 2 episodes and have an even longer series. But let's see how we go. So I'm just going to basically refer to the summary table that you should be able to find in the links, or hopefully we can maybe put it up on the YouTube video or whatever as well. So just running down through that about what all's going on. So we're going to start in the middle of the table. We've got the consultations out on CMP 434 and 435. They are the cost code modification changes, which were consulted on earlier in the summer.
Yep. Which both myself and Damian had great fun trying to get a response in time in peak holiday season. So consultant party on that is NESO.
That's NESO, which again, just to avoid any confusion, that's the National Energy System Operator, who previously were a function of National Grid. They are now government owned and called NESO. So we're going to use NESO a lot now to give them their new term rather than National Grid or National Grid ESO.
Yep.
And that's basically the overarching codes. So we're going to touch on that high level in a minute, but that's the high level structure of connection reform basically. And then the other key ones then, so CMP 434 is that high level structure. It then codifies or sets out 3 key methodologies. Keep me right here now,
yep.
Damian.
So CMP 434 would be the umbrella term, and
yes.
Then the methodologies sit in within that.
Perfect. And those 3 methodologies are, there's the gate 2 criteria methodology.
Yep.
So what's the criteria you need to meet to actually get a firm offer?
There's project designation methodology. It's probably the slightly less important one, or a bit more niche, and there's still a bit of a debate as to whether that's going to happen or not. So that's basically if for NISO to designate projects to kind of fast track them or give them a higher priority. Again, we'll come back to that probably in one of the follow-on episodes. And actually, the whole concept of project designation, again, these concepts are up for consultation in CMP 434. So I know there's a lot of debate around the project designation one because people are a bit wary about National Grid being able to cherry pick projects. And then the other big one, so Gate 2 criteria methodology is probably one of the main ones that people will be interested in. Again, we'll do in a follow-up episode. The other big one, actually the main one that people will probably find interesting then, is the CNDM.
A connections network design methodology.
Which is also by NISO, sorry. So CMP 434 basically codifies those three methodologies, but it doesn't actually set out what they are. And an important one for sort of the regulatory kind of people that are into the nitty-gritty, it doesn't look like the content of those methodologies is going to be codified either. It looks like that's going to be a license condition, which segues us into one of the other key consultations that hasn't yet been released. Is Ofgem will be consulting on modifications to the transmission and distribution licenses. So we haven't got a date on that yet, but basically that'll mop up some of these other changes, things like putting some regulatory rules in place for the likes of the project designation methodology and the connections network design methodology. But just going back to the connections network design methodology, we'll call it CNDM. For short, because we do love an acronym. That basically sets out how the queues will get formed, how NISO, sorry, I was about to call it National Grid, I keep doing that, how NISO will allocate the capacity to different projects. It is the really big one, in my opinion anyway. It's the key bit of detail that we've kind of been waiting for or looking for. So just to kind of recap on dates, CMP 434, the kind of overarching one, and then it also has like a sister mod called CMP 435, which is more about retrospectively applying all these rules to the existing queue. We'll probably keep our focus on CMP 434. It's the kind of main one, and you can kind of just take it for granted that it's going to be retrospectively applied. But there's some nuance and detail in there for anybody that's in the queue. So it went live on the 8th of November, and it closes on the 26th of November. So it is the shortest timeline of them all, and it is quite key. You then have the three methodologies, so the Gate 2 criteria, project designation, and connections network design. They all opened on the 5th of November, and they will close on the 2nd of December. So again, none of these give you a lot of time in the run-up to Christmas and everything else. So put the Christmas shopping on hold, and it's all about reading and writing responses. Then two other important ones then that sit alongside these. There is a financial instrument call to input from NISO. That opened on the 5th of November. It also closes on the 2nd of December. And that's basically looking at things like a capacity bond type mechanism before you can accept a Gate 2 offer and book up capacity. So there's been numbers around what?
It's 20,000 per megawatt.
20,000 a megawatt. So, and currently that's only looking at export capacity, isn't it?
Yeah, only generators at the minute.
So there's basically this idea floating about around before you can book up export capacity, you'd have to put down a 20 grand per megawatt, some type of security or bond or whatever when you're accepting the offer or applying for it, or is that kind of open?
I think it's open. They're still looking for input from developers and how that's going to work.
Okay, so that's an important one because I know that's caused a lot of kind of consternation across the industry. There's a lot of people that might work for. There's probably more people it won't work for, and would make it very difficult to obtain capacity. But again, we'll come back on all of these in a little bit more detail in the follow-up episodes. The other big one then is the Ofgem end-to-end review, which fair play to Ofgem. They've basically released this consultation on the 8th of November as well. It doesn't close until 26th of the 11th. Oh no, sorry, I'm reading the wrong one. It closes on the 13th of January.
Yep.
So again, a lovely one. Don't have to worry about it now. but you can be reading and writing your response to that over the Christmas holidays. Basically, it looks to mop up just about everything else that isn't covered. And I do think fair play to Ofgem. They could quite easily have kind of said, look, there's enough going on, let NISO deal with this. But they've actually looked to sort of step forward and fill a bit of a vacuum there around the wider connection experience. So, obviously a lot of people would have issues and have maybe been complaining to Ofgem around, well, there's regulated timeframes to get an offer, but after that, a lot of people are kind of left to fend for themselves. There's no guarantees on when you get connected. We talk about it all the time, the 10-year, the £10 million risks. So it's looking at, well, actually, how do we strengthen the wider connection journey for customers across GB? Looking at things like, ensuring DNOs actually stick to connection dates, that they're being relatively ambitious on setting the dates as well. So there's a lot of stuff in there that is actually quite interesting and would improve the overall picture. Obviously, connection reform that we keep talking about is primarily looking at how you get capacity allocated and that early stage of a project. There's a whole piece here then of once that's kind of sorted with a asterisk sorted, how does everything move forward beyond that? There's obviously a lot of work goes into actually delivering these connections, giving people and investors enough certainty that they are going to get connected on time to invest in the projects and everything else. So that end-to-end review is huge.
Yep.
It'll probably be the last one we come to in this little mini-series just because there is extra time. So I'm going to make use of that extra time, and we're probably not going to record it today. We're going to be, Damian's going to be trapped in this room with me for long enough. So we will come back, we'll do an episode on it because it definitely is worthwhile and it touches on a lot of important subjects. And as I already mentioned, we've got the transmission distribution license. They will need modified. They do need to mop up some of the stuff of connection reform that's not going to be in the CUSC or the other codes. And then there's also an important one to note, particularly for any people that are connecting generation at a smaller level.
Yep.
So one of the big frustrations we've had a lot of customers talk to us about is trying to put PV on the roofs of factories or big sheds, or even just small community energy schemes that are getting caught in all this mess with the multi-gigawatt projects. So the network operators are looking at increasing the 1 megawatt threshold. So just to explain, at the minute, if you've got more than 1 megawatt of generation, you're getting caught in the whole nationwide queuing issue with your generation. So it basically makes any sort of solar battery storage above 1 megawatt for a small operator trying to decarbonize their business. It makes it just a total nightmare, and you'll probably end up with 2035, 2036 connection dates.
Yeah, I think the big trigger for this one was that it came out that it was sort of capturing a lot of community
Yes.
groups that were doing solars. So that sort of triggered the DNOs to sort of relook at it.
You'll have two main people. You'll have the community energy groups, and then you'll have just business, general businesses, sheds, warehousing, manufacturing, trying to put solar and batteries and different things on to decarbonize. So that is good. So they're looking at moving that from 1 megawatt to 5 megawatts and looking at the transmission impact assessment on that. So there's no consultation or information on that at this moment in time. That's something that the network operators are looking at. Again, from their point of view, it also helps them because the higher that threshold, the less applications that NISO and the transmission operators have to deal with as well. So that's worth keeping an eye on too. So that's a quick recap. That table with all those dates and all those consultations things I just talked about, that is on our LinkedIn feed. The link should be in the comments to this video. And now we're just going to step into a bit of a high-level overview on CMP 434, the snazzily named CMP 434, which is, as we said, that kind of high-level structure for connection reform. So I think I've already mentioned, just rattle off a few key facts here. Previously consulted on back in the summer where you had a bit less than 2 weeks to respond. This is the new structure, the new process. Currently would apply to all generation above 1 megawatt, subject to the threshold change that we just mentioned, and all transmission connected demand. Distribution demand is still out of scope, but that raises a lot of grey areas that we flagged in our previous podcasts as well. And we'll probably dive into that more later when we get into the episode on the connection network design methodology. And one of the other things, it also appears that demand applying via an IDNO may be able to avoid some of the complexities in this as well. It's another grey area. As a wider utilities group that has an IDNO as part of our group, we've been getting quite a few customers make inquiries about this too. But again, I think at this stage, it just looks a little bit grey to be definitive on. And basically, what does it look like, or what are the key changes? So we discussed previously how there's the Gate 1, Gate 2 process. Gate 1's now optional.
Yeah, it's now completely optional. So Gate 1 and Gate 2 windows will run concurrently.
So we probably discussed previously on the podcast kind of what is the point of Gate 1 to developers. It's more of gives a bit of an idea to the network operators of what might be coming. So they've basically codified that to say, well, look, you can make it optional if you want. So Gate 1, Gate 2 will open concurrently. What's the kind of timing regime around it? It's biannual. They're going to open.
Yeah, it's 2 windows each year, and it's a 6-month process.
So the gate windows will open every 6 months.
Every 6 months.
But the actual process itself, I think, runs for 12. Isn't that right?
Yeah, 12.
So that leads to this really. There's a real complexity here then, because you have a real overlapping process. So if you imagine, let's just talk about Gate 2, because that's the gate you need to meet to get a firm offer. That'll open. Let's just use January. It won't open in January, obviously, but let's just keep it clean. That will open in January. NESO will then spend the next 12 months doing the design process, get offers out the door. I'm looking at a time scale here, so there'll be the first kind of month and a half to get the applications in.
Yep.
There'll be a month and a half for NESO to vet the applications, make sure they're competent, get any extra info or whatever. And then there'll be 5 months of design work or capacity allocation work for NESO to do. The Gate 1 offers will go out after month 3, but they're basically indicative, so let's set them to the side for now. And it's basically around month 9 that a customer should receive an offer. And then the customer should have about 3 months to accept that offer based on the current timescales. I think I should say the timescales and all this, they are expecting to be put into the licenses, which would be subject to that off-gem consultation we signposted earlier. That's why it's kind of important to have a view of everything that's going on, because there's certain stuff is being done.
Which is also subject to off-gem's determination date and implementation date.
So there's so many moving parts here and interlinked parts. But the big issue I see here is it's in month 7 when NESO were still doing design and capacity allocation that it opens to new applications. So, and as well, so that's one issue. So they then start the second phase or the second window design process when the offers go out the door. But a big question in my mind is, well, when you start the second batch or the second gate and you start studying it, are you just going to assume that every offer you issued in the previous phase has been accepted? Or in which case then you might be more onerous on the people in the second batch or second phase? Or I don't see any other. You have to kind of assume that, don't you?
And the same thing would repeat in window 3.
Yeah, so window 3 is going to start basically just as the final acceptances come in from window 1. There, we have like at demand level, we have interactivity and things like that. But this almost looks like it's going to drive interactivity. So I'm really not sure. Again, we'll try and keep this high level. I'm not sure how that's going to work in practice. I know the previous proposal was to run this annually. In which case that makes more sense. I get that NESO have had pressure to make it more regular, because it's quite a long time for anybody to wait to apply annually. I think we did a bit comparing this to the Republic of Ireland system, which is a bit more annual. But again, I'm just not sure how the 6 month works. It kind of looks like it might disadvantage you if you're coming in the following batch. And then if people drop out of the first phase, how does, there's going to be a load of then going back and reorganizing the queue and all this sort of stuff. So that's probably a high level kind of how it works. Obviously getting into Gate 2 is subject to the Gate 2 criteria methodology, which we'll touch on in the next podcast. But ultimately, very high level, it's looking at project readiness and does it align to the government's strategic targets. So that's probably actually a big thing to recap on since we last did the podcast. We've obviously had a new government in the UK who have come out with some big ambitions around clean power 2030, which basically means having a clean power system by 2030. So there's there's been a much greater focus on actually looking at, well, how do we deliver this? We need projects that are ready to meet 2030 targets.
Yep.
And then aligned to that, NISO have also said, well, we can't just look at 2030. Demand growth will continue, so we'll need more generation by 2035 again to keep the clean power system if we do hit it in 2030. So there's this whole piece around only giving Gate 2 offers then to projects that strategically align to the 2030 and 2035 ambitions. That was probably a key one. Other key aspects of CMP 434, basically a Gate 2 offer then firms up your connection point, your capacity, the reinforcement substation base, liability securities, and I suppose importantly that new set of strict milestones that a project has to keep pace with. The milestones have been changed a little bit based on work group feedback. So milestones, I think, around achieving planning have been extended a little bit to be a little bit more realistic. So again, if you were kind of following us on the last one, it's worth kind of going back and looking into those milestones in a bit of detail as well. And as we said earlier as well, then it kind of codifies references to the three key methodologies, which are those Gate 2 criteria, the project designation, and then the connection network design, which basically is all the detail on how this works. So we'll be getting into a lot more detail on all of this in the following episodes. And that's CMP 434. There's a lot of other kind of niggly bits. If you're really into the detail of this, you definitely need to be reading through it all. There's a lot of different details, different changes in the minutiae, but high level, the annual windows changed to 6 months. Gate 2 criteria. A lot of the details actually been removed from CMP 434 and replaced with a definition of, refer to the Gate 2 criteria methodology or refer to the connection network design methodology for that. So most of the detail has actually been shifted out of the code reform and is being put into these other documents. So that's kind of where most of the interesting stuff sits here. Is that?
Yeah, so all the high level information is in the CMP document, and then all the detail is just referred to the specific methodology.
Okay, so we have overrun on time slightly, but we're almost, we're not too far overrun. So I think that's a good summary to start off with. Yep. We've covered the table of all the different consultations that are going on there, and we have went through CMP 434 high level. The only other thing I was going to mention on this episode is there's also another few different key documents that aren't on our summary table just yet. So there's a couple of key things around the guidance on significant application modification. So basically, NISO are to release a document on guidance around what changes can you make to a Gate 2 offer without losing your queue position. There is then also guidance on
material technology change.
Material technology change as well, which is basically kind of similar. Technology change is probably going to be a bit more technical document about changing your inverters and that kind of thing.
It'll include if you go from a single site to a hybrid site.
Yes, and actually that's the one a lot of people at the minute are asking about, converting battery storage applications to data centers, for example. Apologies, just my timer going off in the background. So that guidance document will deal with that as well. So those are two other key documents. They were supposed to be out, I think, around now, but that's been pushed back to kind of Q1.
My understanding is it's been pushed back to Q1 next year.
So that's Q1 2025. So that's another couple of key documents as well. But so we'll wrap up now. Myself and Damian will go grab a quick cup of tea, and we will be back in the next episode then getting into more detail on the methodologies, which is probably where most of the interesting stuff lies, to be honest. So thanks for listening. And for us, we'll be back in about 10 minutes. But for anybody listening, we'll be back in the next episode. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you get your normal podcasts. Thanks.